Salvete omnes, this is Imamelia, also known as the Martian Geek, and welcome back to another episode of the Bayonetta scale. It's time to discuss level 8, The Stars Would Have to Align. This is for games that I'll probably never play on here. They just have too much going against them and not enough going for them. But there is still a chance if the circumstances are just right. As a bit of trivia, this is also the highest rating on the original scale that actually did have something return. For these games, pretty much, if people want it enough and can give me enough good reasons for it, I'll do it, but don't count on it. Especially given how unpopular Let's Plays seem to be nowadays. If I'm going to be busting my butt making a video for 6 views, it had better at least be a game I enjoy. Fair warning, there will definitely be some hot takes in this section. No childhood is safe from being trampled on. And in fact, that includes the first game on our list, Super Mario 64. What a classic, am I right? It was a launch title for the Nintendo 64, the first 3D Mario game ever made, probably one of the first 3D console games ever made in general, a pioneer for all sorts of new stuff, and quite probably the most overrated game I've ever played. I'm sure it was cool in 1996, but looking back on it now, it really doesn't hold up very well. I have a bit of a soft spot for the 90s when it comes to video games, but you can definitely tell that while 2D games are well established, 3D games were still in their infancy. Because a lot of 2D games from that era aged like fine wine, but a lot of 3D games from that era aged like potato salad in Death Valley. There were a lot of things about this game that annoyed me. The controls were kind of a pain, no thanks to the Nintendo 64 controller being the odd shape it was and having the worst analog stick in the history of video game controllers. The camera was pretty crappy. I know that I said that it was one of the first 3D games, but come on people, try harder or test better. And then there's the whole Power Star system. I'm not sure I can entirely blame that on the hardware, to be honest. For some reason, forever unbeknownst to me, Nintendo thought it would be a fine idea for the game to only have 15 levels, but make you do each one 6 or 7 times. Why? Yes, I know there are slight differences between missions, but not very dang many. They could have easily had you get all the stars in one run like Super Mario Odyssey does, and it wouldn't make much difference, except that then people would realize how little actual content the game has. You might be thinking, well, give them a break, they had to fit it onto an 8 MB cartridge. It was the first 3D Mario game, you know. Yes, we've established that. But if you're trying to make a complex open game, and the hardware and media available is holding you back, you either wait until more advanced stuff gets cheaper and then make your game with the scope you want, or you make a simpler game. You don't try to make your original complex game, but then scale it down and pad it like a woman born with 12 ovaries. Sheesh! The level design doesn't even look all that good, frankly. From what I've seen, a lot of the missions look like they'd either be a huge pain in the butt or be over in half a minute. Super Mario Bros. 3 had short levels, but at least it generally kept them interesting and unique. And the original Super Mario Bros. 3 used level designs, but only for 5 out of 32 levels, and that game was 40 kilobytes. Someone once said that every Let's Player eventually does Super Mario 64 at some point in their career. Well, not this Let's Player. If you want to see a person who actually likes this game play it, check out Masayanella's channel. As for me, though, I have better options. Banjo-Kazooie. Another Nintendo 64 game that I don't care for many of the same reasons as the last, but not all the same. You don't really have to keep redoing levels in this one, except when you need a power-up from a later level, but I still don't like the format. Like I said last episode, I just don't like collectathons. My dad doesn't like Easter egg hunts because, as he puts it, he already spends enough time wandering around looking for stuff as it is, so why would he want to do such a thing for entertainment? That's basically how I feel about collectathon games. I already don't think exploration in video games is all it's cracked up to be, but wandering around looking for a bunch of crap is a lousy way to do exploration anyway. At least with the Easter eggs, you get candy for the trouble. There's no danger, you don't have to fight a poor user interface, unless you have a physical disability, I guess. There's nothing special that you get for 100%, and the people who designed it don't put prizes behind fake walls or down pits or anything like that. And unlike with Spyro, there's no nostalgia to help out here. Furthermore, exploring is a lot more dangerous in this game than it is in Spyro. Losing lives puts you at more of a disadvantage, it seems like, and I don't like the characterization as well. Kazooie is a jerk, and putting googly eyes on everything is not that clever. Yeah, another supposed classic, and another game that I could do without just fine. Donkey Kong 64. The genre of this one pretty well speaks for itself. In fact, from what I've heard, this game was so collectathon-y that it even turned off some people who liked the genre and contributed to its decline. Personally, I don't think it declined that much, since there still seem to be plenty of them in the PS2 generation, but I suppose they weren't quite as ubiquitous as in the previous one. But yeah, I don't think so. I'm gonna be honest, I'm actually surprised that there weren't more Nintendo 64 games around this point in the scale. I didn't grow up with the console, so it doesn't have nostalgia going for it. For a lot of my life, all I had was a Super Nintendo. Around 2007, we got an original PlayStation, a PS2 shortly after that, and then a Wii shortly after that. But it wasn't until about 2013 that I really started adding to my console collection. I got both my Nintendo 64 and original Nintendo around the same time that year. Unfortunately, I only really had that much fun with one of those, and I'll give you a hint, it wasn't the one that came out after I was born. I've had a good enough time with the PlayStations, playing things like Crash Bandicoot, Spyro, and Mega Man X, but the Nintendo 64, for me, that thing was pretty much hype backlash the console. Spyro is better than Banjo-Kazooie, Crash Bandicoot is miles better than Super Mario 64, and there were 3 of them, and Mega Man X 4 through 6 just lack a Nintendo 64 counterpart entirely. I haven't played Mischief Makers yet, so I'll have to see what that's like, but currently I think my favorite Nintendo 64 game is actually Paper Mario, and considering what I said about it last episode and the fact that it's not even in my top 5 favorite Mario RPGs, let alone my favorite RPGs, that's kinda sad. But I suppose I've ranted long enough about my feelings of being underwhelmed. Let's talk about Super Mario Sunshine. I will say that it at least looks like an overall better game than Super Mario 64. It has a better controller, and the whole revisiting levels thing is done a little better this time. Now at least when you have to play the same level 8 times, they've made some changes to it. But I'm still not sure it's right for me. I've watched 2 full LPs of this game, and neither of them exactly sold me on it. It seems like most of the issues I had with Super Mario 64 are still here, just downplayed, and they've also added some really awful secret stuff into the mix. I most particularly would not want to have to deal with the pachinko machine, the poison river, or blue coins just being hidden in random arbitrary places. Yeah, even if I didn't go for 100% in this game, I'm still in no hurry to play it on here. 3D Zelda. Whether it's Ocarina of Time, Wind Waker, Breath of the Wild, or any of the others, I still don't like open-world 3D games. My depth perception's not so great, and I get lost way too easily. I own Ocarina of Time in its original Nintendo 64 incarnation. I've played it, and it took an astonishingly long amount of time just for me to get out of Kokiri Forest. Interestingly, it's not quite the same things that I dislike about 2D Zelda. The whole getting lost, not knowing where to go part is certainly still there, but at least the 3D games aren't so bad about hiding stuff behind fake walls and such. Still though, it's not a style of gameplay that I'm particularly good at, and I haven't really found any games of that type that I like well enough to get better at them. So while I'm sure there are some good games here to be found, I'd just rather leave Let's Playing them to people who enjoy them. Again, I have to plug Miss Anella here. She likes Zelda, she's done full LPs of several of them on her channel, and she's adorably perky and upbeat. As for me though, I'd rather be doing other things. And you know what's even less likely than 3D Zelda? 3D Metroid. I've heard good things about Metroid Prime, Other M not so much. But combining everything that I struggle with in 2D Metroid with everything that I struggle with in 3D games, that just sounds like an aneurysm waiting to happen. More so when you consider that all the 3D games I have experience with are third person, not first person. YukoLaylee. This game was developed by Playtonic Games, an indie studio with a lot of the people who worked on Banjo-Kazooie, and it's actually intended as a spiritual successor to Banjo-Kazooie, so naturally it comes with the same issues as Banjo-Kazooie. And Banjo-Kazooie I've at least played. I never even got a chance to try this game because, well, put it this way, I have it on Steam, and when they say that a controller is recommended for it, they're not kidding. It is pretty much unplayable with the keyboard because they are too freaking lazy to implement customization for the controls. Yep, the buttons are hard-coded, in a PC game, released in 2017. Why? Beyond that though, I still don't like collectathons. I don't like them on the PC, I don't like them on the PS3, I will not play them on an Xbox, I will not play them as Star Fox. I do not like them, YouTube fans, I hope you all can understand. Castlevania, the other half of the Metroidvania term. Well, I'm already lukewarm on Metroid, and these are basically Metroid with crappy physics. Or at least the ones from Generation 5 and beyond are. The earlier ones are more just standard side-scrolling action games with crappy physics. Seriously, I'm not kidding. I played Castlevania 4, and one person said that being able to whip in 8 directions makes the game too easy. But I just played it and thought, wow, this game has easily the second worst jump physics that I've ever had the misfortune of having to deal with in a platformer. I'll answer the obvious follow-up question next time. It actually did do some pretty interesting things with the console's hardware, like some of the fancy Mode 7 effects and such, but the actual gameplay left me thoroughly unimpressed. I've seen full Let's Plays of at least 3 other games in the series too, and none of them particularly sold me either. Some of these do at least have teleport rooms, unlike Metroid, but I still feel like they're a case where I'd spend more time trying to backtrack and find that one part where my new power will let me do something than making meaningful progress. And while we're on the subject, let's talk about Shantae. This is an indie game series about a half-genie girl who uses shape-shifting and various other magical powers. I played some of the first one for the Game Boy Color, mainly on an emulator because the original cartridge cost a mint and the version on the 3DS Virtual Console doesn't have sensible button mapping. But I'm the most familiar with the second game, Risky's Revenge. And if it's any indication what the rest of the series is like, I'm not that sorry that I missed them. I can see why people would like them, and there was some decent platforming and puzzles and such, but it's still a Metroidvania, and it still gave me the feeling that either the entire genre is actually junk and people merely think they like it, or I just don't understand it. Am I missing something here? Maybe somebody who actually likes the genre can explain to me in what universe walking back and forth through the same freaking forest upward of 6 times is remotely close to good game design. Well, I got most of the way through the game. I reached the part where you have to go all over the world map to find a set of trinkets, and at that point I decided I'd had enough. Heck, I even tried the third game, and I wasn't even done with the intro stage before it started finding ways to tick me off, not all of which had to do with level design. I know that part of being an adult is giving things another chance when you might not have liked them the first time, but you know what they say about how the definition of insanity is doing the same thing repeatedly and expecting different results. I didn't like games with similar gameplay to Shantae, so there's no real reason why I'd like Shantae's gameplay either. And then there's the character designs. I don't know what language the name Shantae comes from, but if her outfit is any indication, it's Persian for stripper. Somebody get this girl a freaking shirt, because right now she is half human, half genie, and half naked. And it's not just her, all the other young women in the games are the same way, even the villains. Even most of the bosses you can fight generally have their breasts barely covered and bulging out like a matched pair of late-stage oncogenic cysts. And these are rated E10+. At least if they were T, it might be a bit more excusable, but why are they using the haha monkey brain go ooh sexy lady marketing technique on 10-year-olds? I realize that women should be able to wear what they want, but if anyone honestly believes that feminism has anything to do with the way these characters look, I have a bridge to sell you. Yeah, those revealing outfits are female empowerment, sure. And I suppose next you'll tell me that everyone dressed like that also being young, attractive, and big-chested is completely coincidental. Apparently this is a common theme with a lot of WayForwards games, which is disappointing. When I realized that they were never going to design a game without making the cast look like sluts, I decided that I didn't want to support them. I actually backed the Kickstarter for the 4th game before finding that out, and afterward I just wanted to find a way to get my money back. And considering I only gave them $5, that's probably not a good sign. Wait a minute, Shantae has magic powers, she walks around without enough clothing on, and she attacks people with her hair? Oh my gosh, what if Shantae is actually Bayonetta from an alternate universe? Shantae-Anetta? I knew there were reasons that her games didn't sit right with me. Wild mass guessing aside though, the bottom line here is, when it comes to things a game can do that will almost immediately turn me off from it, being a Metroidvania is certainly on the list, and sexualizing the characters is even higher on it, and Shantae definitely hits both of those. Yoshi's New Island. There have probably been bigger letdowns in recent Nintendo history, but I can't think of any. After Yoshi's Island DS was so thoroughly middling, I thought that surely this one would be better when they announced it. I thought that even though it's by the same studio that did such a shoddy job the first time, maybe they learned from their mistakes. I thought that at the very least the soundtrack had to be better. They wouldn't screw that up twice in a row, would they? Oh, you sweet summer child. Well, as it turns out, this game is just as lame as Yoshi's Island DS was, albeit easier. Yoshi's Island DS at least tried some interesting things, and I can still recall levels from it even though I haven't played it that much. I played about a third to a half of this game and barely even remember anything about it except for new Yoshi transformations and a level focused on cross-sections and going back and forth between different sections. That and the fact that the music was somehow even worse. I don't actually remember what it sounded like, but maybe my brain blocked it out to spare me. Also, since it's on the 3DS, it would be harder to record than Yoshi's Island DS. With all that considered, it goes up higher on the scale than that game. You know, I almost never find the first game in a series to be the best, but the original Yoshi's Island is so much better than pretty much anything that came after it that it's not even funny. Still waiting for a good or even decent Yoshi game that just uses a regular art style instead of everything being made out of craft supplies, Nintendo. Come on. Mario Kart. Any and all of them. I'm most familiar with the original Super Mario Kart and Double Dash, but I've at least played all of them except Mario Kart DS. This is another of those games that really just works better if I play it on my own time rather than trying to do it as a Let's Play. I'm sure that people have done Let's Plays of all of them, but I'm not good enough at any of the games to actually beat them, especially given how much the AI cheats on higher difficulties. They're also a lot more fun to play with friends. I don't really even like playing Mario Kart alone, and you know how hard it is to get people together for co-op LPs. I could maybe see one of these as just a one-off project with someone just for fun, but I'd still have to have that other person, which isn't terribly likely. For the same reason, I don't think I'd ever do a Mario Party game on here. It would be just as hard to find people for those, maybe harder since I'd want 3 other players instead of just 1, and I've barely even played the series. Heck, I've probably spent more time watching Nella and Chugga Conroy play Mario Party than I have playing Mario Party. So, again, doubtful, ask again later. Pokemon. Again, this applies to every game in the series, or at least the main one. I don't know much about the spin-offs. This is one of those hugely popular things that I just never bite into the hype for. They're basically RPGs, and while it shouldn't be too much of a secret that RPGs are a genre I enjoy, I really need them to have at least a decent story or a decent battle system, preferably both. Pokemon seems to be pretty minimalist with both of those things. It also seems to want you to grind a lot to train up and evolve your Pokemon. Some people like that kind of thing, but personally I don't. I hate mandatory grinding in RPGs. To me, it says that the game either wasn't balanced or paced properly, or both. And it's boring, and it doesn't so much slow the pacing as outright defenestrate it, and I just can't imagine that it would be at all interesting to watch. Even outside of the grindy bits, I feel like there wouldn't be much going on. It would be like Trails in the Sky if you took out almost all the story and replaced the battle system with just a standard no-frills turn-based one. So I guess a better comparison would be not actually that much like Trails in the Sky at all, other than the genre. I don't know, I feel like these games would be better material for a long road trip than for a Let's Play. But they're still not the most overhyped RPG series around. There's the long runner known as Final Fantasy. Once again, they're all getting the same rating because I feel pretty nearly the same about all of them. Admittedly, I haven't played most of them, but from what I know, my major complaints with them are pretty common across the series. The Bravely games are a different story, despite technically being related to Final Fantasy, but I already rated those previously. The main one I played in the main series was Final Fantasy VI, and dear lord, the random encounters in the ATB system just ruined it. Random encounters had no reason to be as prevalent as they were for as long as they were. I realized that it was primarily because of system limitations on old consoles like the NES, but I don't believe for a second that developers couldn't have overcome that if they'd actually given a crap. Action-adventure games like the original Legend of Zelda handled on-field enemies just fine, didn't they? All you need to do is have a bit flag for completion of each battle in the area. If you figure about 40 regular enemy fights for the average dungeon, that'll cost you 5 bytes of memory. Even on a console that only has 2 kilobytes of built-in RAM, that's not that big a deal. Random encounters are necessary because of system limitations? Like heck they are. And as for ATB, that's a mechanic that if anything is even more inexplicable in how long it stuck around. It was in at least, 4 or 5, maybe more of the main Final Fantasy games? It's not quite turn-based and not quite action-based, but somehow worse than both. You know how a lot of sporks don't make a good spoon or a good fork? That's basically what ATB is like. It was probably supposed to bridge the gap between turn-based and action-based battles, but if you ask me, all it managed to do is suck equally at both. You wait around for your next turn to come up, and then the enemy attacks you while you're still in the menu. How did the system make it into even 2 or 3 games, let alone 5 or more? In the case of Final Fantasy VI specifically, I think I got to the part where you get the airship and didn't continue beyond that. Some people might say that I can't judge the game by just that much and that it gets better later, but I assure you, unless it completely changes the battle system or how encounters work, no it doesn't. So I guess my issues aren't really with Final Fantasy in and of itself, but with the obnoxious basic game mechanics built into a lot of them. If I'm getting driven up the wall by those, I can't focus on the story, music, graphics, or any of the other stuff. It's kind of like trying a fancy ice cream parfait and finding out that they used liver-flavored ice cream, but people think you're complaining because the first layer of parfait is boring. Like, yeah, I know it's just plain ice cream on top, but there are all kinds of delicious toppings with fruit and chocolate and stuff farther down. No, the problem with the parfait isn't that there wasn't enough topping. The problem is that it tastes like freaking liver. I don't know, maybe newer games are better, though it's entirely possible that I'd merely have different complaints with those. For the earlier games, though, they're not the worst games out there, but given how time-consuming most RPGs are to record, when there are at least a dozen others that I've never played on here that I actually like, I see very little reason to do ones that I find meh at best. Fire Emblem is another renowned RPG series that I'm not particularly interested in doing on here. I got Fire Emblem Awakening during my brief period of trying to expand my horizons and see if maybe some things that I didn't expect to like I might actually like. Well, I can't really say for sure whether or not it was a good game, but I do know that I was absolute trash at it. I don't know what it was, but I could not keep the protagonist alive consistently, nor keep Lissa from getting one shot by every enemy out there, and I only got through about 2 or 3 chapters before deciding to move on. I don't think I'm very good at tactical RPGs in general. I played part of Luminous Arc, and while I did get further in that game than I did in Fire Emblem Awakening, I still wasn't great at it. Funny, I seem to suck at pretty much every genre except 2D platformers. Fancy that. There's also the Tales series. Not trails as in pathways, but tales as in stories. They're all called Tales of something, like Tales of Xillia, Tales of Vesperia, Tales of Eternia, Tales of Chlamydia, and so on. For instance, the first one is Tales of Fantasia, and it might as well be called Tales of Aphantasia because I just can't picture myself playing it. These games are basically action RPGs, but they have that thing where you have a full party, but all except one character is AI controlled, which I've never liked. If you're going to give me more control by using an action-based battle system, why do you then take away 75% of the control that I have by handing over all but one of the party members to the computer? Yeah, you can set tactics for them, but it's not enough. You might as well either balance the game around only a single playable character like Ys Origin does, or just make it turn-based. That being said, I think it actually would be interesting to do some of the later games with other people. In games like Tales of Symphonia and Vesperia, you can have up to 4 players with each person controlling a different character. The thing is, even though I think that could be neat, the difficulty of doing RPGs plus the difficulty of doing co-op projects still makes it pretty darn unlikely. Doing them solo would be a lot easier to find time for, but it would also be a lot less fun. This is why I need a girlfriend or queer platonic partner. Or 3 of them. I don't know if a 4-person QPR counts as polyamory, but this is a polyamory positive channel anyway. How do I always end up talking about queer issues on here? Anyway, yeah, these probably won't happen for a few reasons. Kid Icarus Uprising. Another game from the attempted opening my mind period. I haven't played the original Kid Icarus, but this is a sizable departure from it. I played the first 2 or 3 levels of this, and I like the characters, but the gameplay isn't really my kind of thing. It also hurt my hands like heck. I don't know how it would compare on different 3DS models, but I was playing it on an original 3DS with no stand, and I could usually only get about halfway through a level before my hands would be too cramped to continue without taking a break. It seems like it would be a pain to record to boot. So unless you all want to make big enough donations to my Patreon to more than cover treatment for carpal tunnel, probably not doing this. Earthworm Jim. Last time I rated the second game as 7, and every problem I had with that one applies equally or more so here. This game also has more fake difficulty and no levels that I liked all that much. There are definite nuisances later on, like Peter Puppy, the submarine, the button mash spike shaft, and the bosses of levels 2 and 5 being pretty much RNG, but even level 1 was annoying. How are you supposed to get past those dog enemies in most of the places they are? Because you can't shoot when you're on a rope, and they follow you underneath very quickly. You can't even save the game or even continue from where you left off, not that that would matter much on an emulator. So with all that, this goes up 1 point higher. It's a shame really that they wasted such good technical prowess and such creative concepts on such mediocre design. Undertale. I'll have to get my flame shield ready for this one. You know, why isn't there a Mega Man weapon called the Flame Shield? They've had plenty of fire robot masters, they've had plenty of shield weapons, why haven't they ever combined them? And no, the Scorch Wheel doesn't count. That aside though, is it just my confirmation bias, or do 99% of indie games either fall under the category of artsy and avant-garde but with at least a 4 out of 5 chance of being pretentious, or styled like an 8-bit game but with at least a 4 out of 5 chance of being ridiculously hard? Undertale kind of goes with a bit of column A and a bit of column B. It's a retro-styled, avant-garde, kind of pretentious, kind of hard game, at least based on what I know and have observed about it. To elaborate, I'm not usually insistent on games having good graphics, but the graphics in this game are simplistic enough that I'm not even sure if I can call them NES style, because that's actually kind of insulting to the NES. That console, despite being primitive, was still capable of producing some actually pretty decent looking games like Mega Man 6, Journey to Silius, and Shatterhand. I didn't play enough of it to get a good reading on the difficulty, but considering that it incorporates bullet hell elements, I wouldn't guess that any byte in its code is used to make it easy. The possible pretentiousness in this case is the moral of how you shouldn't be cruel to characters in video games, which in this case takes the form of folding, spindling, and mutilating the fourth wall, and at least in some versions screwing with your registry in the process. It makes me wonder if anything would change if you never gave the game administrator privileges though, and ran it with the internet turned off as well. About that moral though, in this game when you fight enemies you can either kill them or spare them. The more enemies you spare, the fewer levels you gain, but the more enemies you kill, the less the game likes you. It's very different from any other RPG I've played, and I can see how easy it would be for a new player to get thrown off. I don't think the meta twists are as clever as they're made out to be, nor do I think Toby Fox has as much of a point as he probably thinks he does. but that's actually all that I will say on that matter right now. I realized when I was writing down my thoughts that I had enough to say on that subject that it made my earlier rants about Shantae's character designs look downright terse by comparison, so I think that I'll actually make a separate video to talk about that. Overall, I think I can pass on this one. I wouldn't be going into it completely blind. I don't like how the game is set up to where you have to do a low-level run to get the best ending, and both the gameplay and story seem kind of weird, honestly, and in the latter case kind of preachy too, so I'm not sure how to feel. I will fully admit that I haven't played much, but just based on second-hand knowledge, I have a hard time believing that the game is really as special as it's hyped up to be. Crash Mind Over Mutant. This is a direct sequel to Crash of the Titans with the same kind of gameplay. I wasn't big on that game either, and this one seems to be slightly lower in quality. It does add two handy new features, being able to store mutants for later use, and actually being able to jump with them, but the structure is kind of a mess, and I feel like it's overall a worse game, so it's slightly less likely. Portal. I vaguely remember when everyone was raving about this game. It's probably good? I don't know. I played a little of it and it just wasn't my kind of thing. I'm not into first-person games and I'm not really into that kind of puzzle-adventure game, so this seems like another game to put in the let someone else do it pile. Giana Sisters Twisted Dreams. Giana Sisters on the whole has actually been around for quite some time. It was conceived on the Commodore 64 as an answer to the original Super Mario Bros. It was so similar, in fact, that the developers had to put it on hiatus for a while, presumably due to copyright concerns. They eventually came out with Giana Sisters DS, ironically on a Nintendo console. Then after that came this game in 2012, which modernized the graphics and music and varied the gameplay up some by allowing Giana to switch between two different forms and change the world along with her. That's the main gimmick of the game, in fact, and it definitely made it stand out from the earlier Giana Sisters games more, though I feel like they kind of ran out of interesting things to do with it about halfway through and just kept using the same basic elements with stricter timing and more spikes after that. I'll admit, I really wanted to like this game. It was the first game I ever got on Steam. Heck, I think it was the impetus for me getting Steam in the first place. But holy crap on a cracker, is it hard! I did eventually beat it, and I even wrote a review of it on my blog, but it's definitely a contender for one of the most difficult games that I've actually beaten, along with Megamari, Mega Man & Bass, Copy Kitty's Hard Mode, and Ys Origin. The levels are long, too. Like, you know some of the longer levels in Yoshi's Island, like 3-3 and 5-4? That's about the length of the first third of an average level in this game, and they're homogeneous to boot. In something like Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, you at least have nice scenery to look at and nice music to listen to while the game kicks your butt. This game only has 5 different music tracks for levels, 10 if you count the cute and punk variations separately. I did actually like the graphics. They generally looked pretty good, and in fact they actually reminded me a lot of a modern Donkey Kong Country game. But as far as the actual scenery goes, almost every level in the game can basically just be described as outside or inside, with scant variations on one or the other. It's like they only really had 2 different tile sets and just varied up the backgrounds and set pieces a bit. The biggest obstacle is still the difficulty, though. I really can't emphasize that enough. The first 5 levels are fine enough, but the difficulty makes a huge spike at 1-6, partly due to literal spikes, and it never really goes back down after that. The worst parts by far were the levels with the bubblegum power-up. That thing almost ended my playthrough late in the game. There is an easy mode that might be more reasonable, but I don't think that even existed when I first started playing the game, and I'm not sure what newer versions of it have. I recall there also being a hard mode, and I'd rate that a 10 because frankly the base difficulty is hard enough. Of course, if you really want insanity, there's hardcore mode, which has no checkpoints in the levels at all. You do recall me mentioning how long they were, right? Or even uber hardcore, which has no checkpoints in the entire game. As in, if you die at all, you start all the way back at 1-1. Needless to say, those aren't even in the same galaxy as the possibility of me doing them. Giving hardcore mode an 11 almost seems like it's underselling it, and uber hardcore is probably somewhere around a 20, which I define as if you wrote the word nope enough times to cover the surface of Betelgeuse in a font size equal to the diameter of a hydrogen atom. It might come close to expressing how much I don't want to do it, but I'm not sure. To be quite honest, I don't know why game modes that are that brutal even exist. They might as well just call it the mode for savants and people who desperately need more hobbies. Everything beyond the base setting is pretty much pointless to discuss except for shock value anyway, and the base game, as we've established, gets an 8. It's worth noting that there was a sort of mini-sequel/expansion called Rise of the Owlverlord, which is a pretty terrible pun and hard to say. I would expect that it's more of the same thing as the base game, but I haven't played it, so as a result I can't give it its own rating. Anyway, let's also talk about Giana Sisters DS. This game, I believe, is much more like the original Great Giana Sisters compared to Twisted Dreams, which was more of its own thing. I got this game, Mega Man ZX, and Super Princess Peach all around the time I graduated from college. I actually remember asking the eBay seller to delay the shipment slightly so that the game wouldn't distract me from my finals. Funny enough, that backstory is more detailed than I can remember from the actual game. I can at least recall some parts of levels in Twisted Dreams, but I can't remember a single level of this game in more than the vaguest detail. It's sure a heck of a lot easier than Twisted Dreams, I'll give it that, but unfortunately it's just as bland if not more so, since the levels still don't do much to differentiate themselves environmentally, but there's no big gimmick this time. It does make me wonder what other Giana Sisters games are out there that might be worth playing, but it still doesn't seem super likely to happen. Secret of Evermore. I knew pretty much nothing about this game until I watched Roa Mithral's Let's Play of it, and that taught me all that I needed to know. It probably isn't that bad of a game, but it looked pretty tedious in a number of parts and glitchy to boot. You know, I've never been all that impressed with Super Nintendo RPGs. People say all the time that it's a good console for RPGs, and all I can say based on my experience is, no it isn't. I haven't played a huge number of them, but I've played some. I didn't know what was going on with the battle system in Secret of Mana. I've already grumbled at length about Final Fantasy. Honestly, about the only 8 or 16-bit RPGs that I played and tolerated, much less liked, were Super Mario RPG, Chrono Trigger, and Lufia 2. Secret of Evermore, I feel like, is one of those games that'll just never come up again in any Let's Play discussion for me. One of those games that I'll have seen once, never played at length, and then simply left to be forgotten. Scribblenauts, another one of my early DS games. I trust that I don't need to specify whether different games get different ratings. This is one of those things that I thought was a pretty creative idea, but not really up my alley. I was never very good at it anyway. I didn't really have the particular outside-the-box kind of thinking that it asked for. I also let my sister play it, and she actually got farther than me. I'll give a polite pass to LPing it, though. Azure Striker Gunvolt. This was made by Inti Creates, who also did Mega Man 9, 10, the Zero games, and the ZX games, and they had a hand in Mighty No. 9. This game felt a lot like Mighty No. 9 to me, actually. It also feels like something that I disliked more than it seems like I should have, and I'm not really sure why. I liked the Mega Man games they did. Well, okay, maybe not Mega Man 0 so much, but at least 9, 10, and ZX. So it's not just a matter of poor developers. Then again, I barely even remember anything about what I played, which I think was just the demo. I'd probably be willing to give the game another chance at some point, but probably not as a Let's Play. And wrapping things up for today, Octopath Traveler. I suppose it's only fitting that the game with Octo in its name and the number 8 as a major theme ends up at level 8 on the scale, but that's not why I'm putting it here. It's one of those games for which the farther I got in it, the less sure I was that I actually liked it. It's actually the first game I ever got for the Switch, though if I'd waited a bit I could have gotten it on Steam. It's another JRPG developed by Square Enix, and I think with some of the same people who worked on Bravely Default, but I gotta say I liked Bravely Default better. This game certainly wears its retro-style JRPG badge with pride, but it seems rather lighter on the quality of life features than Bravely. For one, it has random encounters, and you can't do much to change their rate, which I'm honestly surprised didn't annoy me more than it did. And enemies' HP doesn't stay visible after you scan them, and probably other things. Most importantly, why is it so stinking hard? And why does everything take so darn long to fight? The latter I can mostly blame on the shield system, which makes enemies take less damage from things that aren't their weaknesses until you use an element or weapon type that they are weak to, which gets rid of one of their shields, and if you destroy all of their shields, they get broken and stunned for a turn or two until they put them back up, similar to the break system in Trails of Cold Steel 3 and 4. Of course, if you don't happen to have a character in the active party who can hit a weakness effectively, you get to eat crap and watch everything barely scratch them. Even so, normal battles feel like they go on for a while, and bosses can take forever at times. I remember fighting at least one of them for 45 minutes straight before losing. The difficulty seems quite intolerant of mistakes and not even consistent. There are definitely some spikes here and there. I remember the mansion in Tressa's second chapter being a particular showstopper, but those moments seem to come with increasingly higher frequency as the game progresses. One of the last bosses I fought before taking a long break from the game could attack 5 times in a row. Have fun getting around that unless you have someone constantly keeping his attack debuffed and someone else constantly healing. Some people might tell me quit complaining and actually take the time to solve problems, noob. I mean, yeah, I could obviously do that, but I could also play a game that doesn't require me to spend hours trying to formulate a viable strategy against an enemy that hits like a rocket-powered Mack truck and takes more punishment than Fort Knox. Or, you know, I could do any number of other things to entertain myself or enrich my life. I bet there are friends whom I haven't talked to in a while. I did quite like the game's soundtrack, though. Bravely Default's was okay, but I thought Octopath's was significantly better. The characters weren't half bad either. Obviously no one will like everyone, some of the villains were pretty monstrous, and I frankly could have done without pretty much everything about Primrose and her story. Certainly my sex aversion didn't help there. I started with Elfin because I like chemist-type characters and I like characters who use items as their main skill set, which is funny because I'm also the kind of person who hoards items in RPGs and never uses them, and those two things mix like oil and water. Tressa was another one of my favorites. For as much as this game clearly takes place in a fantasy world, perhaps the most fantastic element is that its cast includes a likable capitalist. You know... Elfin, Tressa, Ophelia, Cyrus, Ulberich, Therion, Honnet, Primrose... If you take the first letter of each of those names and rearrange them, you know what that spells? Cat photo! This game is a reference to the internet! Well, anyway, Octopath Traveler is in kind of an odd place. It's a decent game, but it's not better than Bravely Default and definitely not better than Trails of Radiant Historia. And for me at least, it seems just too easy to screw up and to make a good candidate for a Let's Play. With that, that's another episode and another rating on the scale, and a pretty long one at that. I not only had a lot of games at this level, I had a lot to say about them. If you want to see me get even more peeved over video games, join me next time.